Welcome back to the Investigator discussion series. I'm rather Incoherent, and this is our final investigator, Gloria Goldberg. This investigator review is a little bit weird in that Gloria Goldberg isn't technically out yet. She's been playable for a few years as a book promo, and her official version's coming out in a couple of months or several months, I don't know the exact release date, for the Drowned City. I'm not going to cover the stuff for Gloria that's not out yet, so I'm only be covering her book signatures today. Let's get into it. She has 5 head, 1 foot, which, you know, great. Average of 6 is totally fine. Tons of investigators have that. 5 head means you're pretty much safe to one side of the Mythos deck with minimal investment. As a Mystic, this is not going to be an issue at all. And normally a Mystic's like, oh, it's fine to have 1 foot. I've got Ward, I've got Promise of Power, easy to overcome a couple of foot tests per scenario. But for Gloria, this 1 foot's even less of a problem than it would be for anyone else in the game. We'll get to why shortly. Proactively, well, we already covered that. She has 5 in head and she's a Mystic, so that's her proactive stats. She does have a 4 in book and a 2 in fist though. 2 in fist is still 7 for a Spectral Razor though, which is totally respectable. 4 in book is a great read the signs and high enough that you can actually investigate using book if you want to, which we'll cover shortly. Gloria does oftentimes find herself building a deck that can investigate using book. Her ability is kind of crazy. You choose the investigator order during the Mythos phase. That's not necessarily important on its own, but when you get to the second part, reaction when you look at 1 or more cards in the encounter deck, look at 1 additional card. And then choose 1 non-elite amongst them, either discard it, put it on top of the encounter deck, or place it face down beneath Gloria, max 3 cards beneath her. So now you're really strongly incentivized to play anything that looks at the encounter deck. Because now not only are you looking at the encounter deck and picking the investigator order, so it's tremendously more valuable to have seen it, because you can say, oh, the first card's Rotting Remains, the second card's an enemy, the third card's also an enemy. I, on Gloria as the Clover, will take the Rotting Remains, and then we'll just give the enemies to our Flex and our Fighter. You can assign the Foot Treachery you draw to anyone but Gloria as an immediate example. Every time someone gets close to dying somehow, it doesn't happen often with the Gloria on the team, but if someone were close to dying, anytime you scry, you're just like, hey, this card doesn't immediately do anything to you. You're gonna draw this, and the rest of the cards don't matter because they can't kill you anymore, right? The ability to pick Investigator Order allows you to baby anyone on your team who needs it, and just generally neuter the Mythos deck extremely effectively with only a couple of scrying cards, although you will need scrying style cards. I haven't even covered the second half of this ability yet. Just looking deeper into the encounter deck when you use cards that do that, combined with being able to pick Investigator Order, is tremendously valuable. Now the second part of this, choose 1 non-elite card amongst them, discard it, put it on top of the encounter deck, or place it face down beneath Gloria. That doesn't matter so much. Putting on top of the encounter deck is kind of irrelevant because you already picked the Investigator Order. I'm sure there's something with this that I'm not realizing, but it's pretty niche and not super important. Discarding it is typically what you want to do. You might think put it face down beneath Gloria is good, but reality is it tends to only be bad when it's in your basement. When we get to her weakness in a second, at least her current weakness, you'll see that putting things beneath Gloria is generally detrimental in her current state, and you're almost always better off discarding the thing you don't want to deal with. In the future, I don't think that's going to be true at all, but for now, the main thing this does is let you discard a card and never have anyone deal with it. A great example of this would be a Deep Wind Bull in Innsmouth, where there's always enough enemies that you're never going to be upset to get rid of Deep Wind Bull without fighting it, right? It's always going to be good to not draw that enemy because there's just enough other enemies, and that guy's particularly big. As for her star, it's +1, look at the top card of the encounter deck. Psych, you actually look at the top 2. That's fine. Typically, you're already scrying at least 2 cards a turn anyway, so it's not really a big deal. But, like, you know, Gloria didn't need a good star. She's already cracked just with the ability to control the Mythos deck, you know, the main obstacle to your success in the entire game. It's a good identity to have. She's 5/9 soak, which is normally, I'm going to be like, oh, post in the thick of it, blah, blah, blah. It's worse than 6/6. However, you're Gloria. You're not going to die to health damage. It's just not a thing. All the cards that do foot tests to deal health damage will mysteriously get drawn by the rogue when you're playing Gloria, so it doesn't matter where her soak is, and this is perfectly fine. For deck building rules, she's deck size 30, and then at character creation, you pick Guardian, Seeker, or Rogue, and then from that class, you'll get levels 0 to 1 events and or skills, up to 10 of them. Obviously, you also get Mystic 0 to 5. Now, while that's pretty flexible and interesting, I'm gonna be honest, I've never really looked very hard at the things that aren't Seeker Gloria, because Seeker Gloria gets deep knowledge as well as strong economy. There's just not a lot of reason for me to look at Rogue or Guardian when the thing I care about most is using deep knowledge to find the cards I'm building around. Coming over to her signature, we have Ruth Westmacott, and unfortunately, Ruth is terrible because Ruth is built around doing things with your basement. Whenever someone draws a thing beneath your basement or interacts with it if it's an enemy, it's gonna get easier. However, we don't care about that because the signature weakness with this version of Gloria really makes the basement a terrible place to put things. Revelation, draw a random non-weakness encounter card beneath Gloria Goldberg. That card gains peril, its effects cannot be canceled, and you get -2 to all skills when resolving its effects. If that card is an enemy, it immediately attacks you. If no card is drawn with this effect, shuffle this card back into your deck. So this will eat a couple of draws. Realistically, at some point, you would like to use Scrying and put like a soft card no one cares about on a good turn underneath Gloria, just so that when you get this, you draw that card and nothing bad happens, as opposed to having this eat up multiple draws. But if you put dangerous cards on you, like Ruth wants you to do, then you draw those, right? You put Deep Wind Bull under you, he comes out, he hits you, you have 3 health left, assuming you're at full health. Less worst case scenario, you put Grasping Hands under you. Well, now you're gonna be taking 3 physical damage. You put Song of the Maja Bird under you. You didn't actually cancel it, it's back on the board, right? Anything you put in your basement is only solved temporarily because of this weakness. So rather than spending 3 resources and 3 experience to get Ruth in play in addition to the ally that you really care about, you could just not play Ruth, commit her for 3 books at some point, and then not use your basement, and basically your signature weakness and signature become blank, which is a good place to live with how dangerous this can be if you play into it. Coming over to one of the earlier decks I played, I was still relatively new to the game when Edge of the Earth was coming out, which is around when this was from, and I played Gloria as a flex character designed to use True Magic to fight with Shriveling or find clues with Clairvoyance, just draw my whole deck, and my whole plan for scrying was I was just going to use Alysa Graham once a turn. Alysa Graham is basically Gloria's real signature 4-cost ally asset, gives you 1/3 soak plus 1 book, and the important part, Lightning Bolt exhaust Alysa, look at the top card of either the encounter deck or any player deck. You may then add 1 doom to Alysa to place the look deck card on the bottom of its deck. So what you really do is you never use any of the stuff after the first lines, look at the top card of the encounter deck. The rest of this card doesn't exist. You tap Gloria's ability, you see the top 2, and you get to assign them as you want. And that just generally allows you to mitigate such a huge percentage of the Mythos deck in anything under 4 players, that it becomes enough Mythos mitigation on its own with just Alysa to basically make your team completely safe forever. And if you think that Alysa is good enough to deal with the Mythos deck in its entirety, does more than enough for Gloria to be worth her spot and manipulate the Mythos deck, that's how I felt when I made this deck, and I still basically agree with that, then rather than running a bunch of separate scrying effects, you just want to run the most possible draw and then contribute to your team somehow. In terms of most possible draw, we have Scroll of Secrets, we have Deep Knowledge. Honestly, I want more than that, and this deck didn't run more than that. This was meant as a True Magic deck before someone pointed out to me that there's a little asterisk here, and this book is actually super unique, trust me. However, this concept of deck, ignoring the True Magic, where you're going to investigate using book because you have St. Hubert's Key and Alysa Graham putting you at 6, and flex using Mystic Arcane assets like Shriveling, you're basically playing a much worse version of a Norman. However, instead of doing what Norman does and getting tempo, you're using Alysa Graham and Gloria's ability to just say no to the Mythos deck, which is very, very powerful. It's also a 71 experience final campaign deck built on misunderstandings of rules, so I really just want to show off that this is an intuitive, good way you can play Gloria, but I don't think it's the best way to play her. Coming over to a much more reasonable experience costed deck, I would probably run 2 copies of Scrying and any Gloria in addition to Alysa Graham. It's just the best thing you have in terms of a backup scry effect. It looks at more cards, it's also a Lightning Bolt. It's a big chunk of experience and takes an arcane slot, so it is in my opinion worse than Alysa, but you can't really run enough draw to say I will find Alysa. And there are no other allies I really care about, so stuff like Calling in Favors doesn't really solve the problem either. So having Scrying as a backup, well, scry effect is pretty valuable. Beyond that, this character is just built as a pretty straightforward pure clover. Clairvoyance, Rite of Seeking, using book boosted to 6 to find clues if it's an interval other than 3, and then a pile of cards that are just obviously good for economy, draw, etc. Notably, we are running Foresight, because in Gloria, you know what card you're drawing. Foresight is actually just ward level 5. Now, this is a character that I've labeled as Clover, but you can very easily bring it to a team under the idea that this is a flex character, where rather than killing enemies, you're just using your ability and discarding enemies. It's not that you're going to kill an enemy, it's just that it doesn't matter that the enemy could have been drawn because it didn't get drawn consistently. And I've definitely had that experience when I was playing my Flex Gloria in Innsmouth, where even though I really only ran 3 cards to Alyssa's 1 scrying, I felt like I always had enough scry effects. And even though I didn't have much way of fighting, it was just 2 copies of Shriveling, infinite Shrivelings because of True Magic, but still, I still consistently found that that was more than enough fighting because you're using Gloria's effect to turn off enemies. So it might seem disingenuous to call a deck with literally no fighting abilities a flex, but I promise you, outside of the boss, this pretty much plays like a flex character in terms of how much fighting pressure your team will be under if you want to minimize that. You can also play it as a pure clover, not really focus on discarding enemies, and you just use it to discard the most dangerous things, cards that add recursive doom, stuff like that. But you can very easily tilt Gloria to any role. You could play her as a flex character much more genuinely by swapping out Clairvoyance and Rite of Seeking for like Shriveling and Brand of Gthaga, and then using your up to 6 book to just find clues the hard way. You can build Gloria really towards any role. I would look at ideally bringing this exact deck, maybe with a cut for Spectral Razor, and playing as the secondary support in a team with a strong fighter. Not secondary support, secondary Clover, a support Clover, and a team with a good fighter. Because you do need a fighter that's actually gonna more or less solo a boss, or a Clover that's packing a lot of heat, if you're gonna bring a flex character that does literally no damage. But the point is that this is the shell for how I would build out any Gloria. The assets might change, I might find a painful cut for Spectral Razor, but this is within 6 cards of whatever I would play my Gloria as pretty much consistently. Because Scroll Deep Knowledge is just too valuable for finding Alysa Graham, I need the additional draw. The other classes aren't offering as much, to the point where I was really seriously considering trying to fit preposterous sketches in the deck. Coming down to a level 0 deck, well, we are a Mystic, so not a lot of cards are changing. In fact, it's really just Foresight entering the deck. At level 0, we have Antediluvian Hymn. This is one of the cooler cards that came out for Gloria and Hemlock Vale. I like the idea of it. The most recent campaign I played now is Dream Eaters. We had a Dream Side support Gloria, by which I mean that Gloria did not find clues and it did not kill enemies. They dealt 0 damage, and they found maybe like 4 clues per scenario on average, maybe less than that. So they were almost pure support. And I've gotta say, a big part of why was Antediluvian Hymn. The amount of tempo you lose when you give up 2/3 of your turn to scry with this is pretty brutal. I also saw them a lot of times just like use this and then the agenda advance after 1 round, which is admittedly Pilot error, but the agenda advancing will often undo your scries. So this is actually a little bit more situational than it might seem, where if you have 1 doom left on an agenda and it's going to advance after this round, you actually don't want to play this because it's just going to be a 2-cost double action scry for 1 round, which is pretty low value. I think the action cost for using this is pretty tremendous. I don't really want to run this. However, at level 0 without upgraded scryings, you know, it's still an action on scrying. I don't have anything better than Antediluvian Hymn, at least I feel that way. So I'm happy running this in the level 0 deck, and the rest of this is all just directly the same cards unupgraded. So what's the upgrade path? Honestly, I want Foresight immediately. I don't like Antediluvian Hymn. I would recommend starting with it so you can play with it and see if you disagree, but it's just such a huge hit to your own tempo. And you have other ways of using it. That's the big thing, right? Like if you draw it after you draw Alysa, it's almost just not worth playing. As for the rest of it, I wouldn't really recommend getting Ward of Protection level 2 at all until much later in the game, because if you need to ward something, you can generally draw it. Sometimes you'll get like double Rotting Remains and you'll think, oh, no one else can take a Rotting Remains, and you'll wish you had Ward 2. It's a nice to have, but it's not important. If I was worried about consistency, I'd be looking at E-Cache level 2 and Scrying level 3 as earlier upgrades, but I'm really not overly worried about that. I would just push for value proactively by upgrading the assets you've built your deck to function with, getting high level Clairvoyance, getting high level Rite of Seeking. This obviously changes if we're talking about like 2-player where 3 clue locations are just much more rare, and you're happy to, because you're Gloria, you can just get 2 clues and then investigate with book a lot of the time. It's not a huge deal. But I think I would just go for proactive value here. I don't really feel like there's a huge amount of frantic need to get E-Cache, to get Scry, and to get Foresight. I feel like everything in this deck is a nice to have. The level 0 version does what you want Gloria to do already. This is actually, in my opinion, one of the more okay decks to bring if you need to like bring a new character to scenario 8. I'd probably not run St. Hubert's Key. I'd probably run Holy Rosary, and I would be doing that to get better numbers on Rite of Seeking Clairvoyance for less resources, because I wouldn't even attempt to like find scenario 8 clues if that was how I was planning to do it with book at base 6 if I found everything. But aside from like having slightly questionable numbers and wanting to find some solutions to that, like if you go to scenario 8, you cut out Arcane Research for in the thick of it and you get something like the 4 of Cups. Is that the purple one? Because normally a Mystic, especially a 5-head Mystic, never needs 4 of Cups. But if you're going to the final scenario with no upgrades, these are all base level upgrades. You're not getting bonuses. 4 of Cups is suddenly pretty good. So Gloria at level 0 is almost feature complete. The only thing I'd be worried about if you were bringing her as a final scenario is the number she's testing at. So the reason I'm sort of wishy-washy and not super committed about what to upgrade is it doesn't matter, you're gonna win. That's just how Gloria goes. Like, it might seem weird to say that just Alysa Graham destroys the encounter deck. I'm telling you, look at the top 2 cards in the encounter deck, discard 1 if no one can handle it, assign the up to 2 remaining cards to whoever you want, is an insane ability. Just Alysa is enough to break every scenario and turn off the entire threat of the game. So coming over to the tier list, the only surprise is that Gloria isn't my number 1. I genuinely think Amanda is that explosively powerful that she will just cancel about, you know, players times 5 Mythos cards at minimum by ending the scenario too quickly. There's a real argument that Gloria is better than Amanda. I don't personally buy it, but Gloria is easily one of the most broken characters in the game. And when you play with Gloria, it's actually kind of a less fun game. She's maybe the only investigator I wouldn't recommend, because now that I've seen her played again recently in Dream Eaters, I remember the real problem with Gloria. Every turn you have this little powwow where everyone looks at the Mythos deck and like, hey, can you take that? I can take this one. Do you want that one? Well, no one wants this one. Do you want to discard it? Oh, we need to discard this other one? All right, so who do we give this to? I know you're not happy with it, but the Mythos face is supposed to be bad. And it just drags the game to a halt every fucking turn when Gloria flips the cards. And the more you scry, the worse this gets. Like, support Gloria really just dragged the game to a halt. It's at least a little bit faster with Alysa Graham when you scry less. But Gloria drags the game to a halt, and it's in the service of making the game non-threatening, which is to say uninteresting. Because you'll have scenarios like in Too Deep, there's that card, it's really iconic. There's the tidal wave of defense that come after you. That just never happens. Into the Maelstrom, there's all these crazy aquatic mon. Nope, they're not there. We're not drawing those. What's that? You're doing the search for Kadath? Don't worry, the Maja birds don't exist. They aren't a problem, it's not gonna happen. Neither is Wondrous Lands, don't worry about it. You're doing the finale of Circle Undone. Don't worry, Azathoth's not gonna slap you. There are so many cards where it's like not just threatening, but it's the thing that makes a scenario that specific scenario. And when you play with Gloria, you grind the game to a halt to remove the thing that makes a scenario iconic. Which, don't get me wrong, the pacing of the game is not a mechanic that affects power level, and being iconic and threatening is bad from an optimization perspective. What Gloria does is incredibly strong, but it's also the least fun kind of strong in the game. I genuinely wouldn't recommend playing with Gloria. That said, I don't even really feel the need to talk any further about her power level. Like, she's above people who don't turn the game off. Amanda doesn't turn the game off so much as cuts off half the game. You're expecting the game to go on for about twice as long as it does when you have an Amanda Sharp playing to her strengths. And like, you could argue either order for these two. I genuinely think Amanda's better. But Gloria is so stupid that anyone who's not just actually winning the game 5 turns early minimum has no argument to be above Gloria. The only quote-unquote weakness Gloria has is that if you're relying heavily on just Alysa, even with backup scryings, there's not quite enough draw, not quite enough scry options to guarantee that you get Gloria scrying online from turn 1. However, that's probably not even going to be true in the near future. Gloria's getting printed. Her new signatures look better to me than her old signatures. They're also more flavorful and more interesting, but stronger as well, in my opinion. You combine that with the fact that she will likely see some amount of support beyond just Alysa and backup scrying, and the moment she gets access to another top tier draw card on top of that, she might reclaim her crown as best character in the game over Amanda, at least in my eyes. But for now, this is where I've got Gloria ranked, and I think this is gonna be the last time I say goodbye before the tier list. I've been Rather Incoherent, thank you for your time. If you made it this far, then please do press all the buttons to make the algorithm happy, I greatly appreciate it. And before I leave, I cannot overstate my gratitude towards the people supporting this channel, both as patrons over on Patreon and as channel members here on YouTube. I'll see all of you in the next one.